What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty here with another episode of Steelers Warm. We are talking wide receiver Dionte Johnson. We are talking, is he worth the dollars he's paid for? Why it might make sense for the Steelers to move on for him? And how does he shape up compared to competitors at the wide receiver position that are getting paid similar money? Now, this is not going to be new, desperately new takes from me. There's going to be some new information. I've never been the biggest fan of Dionte Johnson. I've liked a lot of what he does. I was one of the few people that sat there and I feel like in the Steelers community and said he's definitely not worth the $20 million. And thankfully, that's not what he's paid per year. He's not a top 30 wide receiver in this league. He's good, requires a really good quarterback. And even then, I think he can be hit and miss. He's a great, if he was near number 2, maybe even number 3, you'd be loving it. 2, you're probably pretty happy with it. But with everything going on right now with Dionte Johnson, both on the field in terms of his production and on the field with things like that fumble. We heard him overnight come out and say, I need to do better. I need to get to the ball. He pouts in every press conference. He pouts when they win. He pouts when they lose. He pouts when he gets the ball. He pouts when he doesn't. Those things are all frustrating. But regardless of how we might feel as fans, if you're sitting in a GM room right now, if you're Omar Khan, if you're that front office and Andy Weidel and a few of the other guys, what are you thinking about when it comes to Dionte Johnson? And that's kind of the lens that I want to look at this from. So Dionte Johnson is paid an average of $18.5 million per year. And so that is what it is. He's not a UFA till 2025. So he's got one more year on his deal, which means the Steelers, if they move him, would cop a less of a penalty if they did move him. In fact, I think that's only $5 million next year that they're going to cop. Yeah, so they only hit a dead cap hit of $5.8 million, right? And you probably can I reckon you can easily get a second round pick and some for Dionte Johnson. So the trade market there, if you choose to move on from him, it'll be who wants to trade for him. But that's a question which we'll be able to analyze a little bit as we go through this show. That'll come down to who's willing to give that up for a wide receiver that doesn't go chase fumbles, for example, when his teammates are playing a division rival. Dionte Johnson is the 14th most paid wide receiver on the average per year right now in the NFL. Behind guys like you can see, obviously, behind guys like Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, even Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin. Ahead, it can't surprise me. I do remember Christian Kirk signed that big deal, but he's actually, Kirk had more years on the deal. That's why. But Kirk's actually a little bit out. Christian Kirk's averaging less per year. Mike Evans is in there as well. He's a bit more on what I'd call, and Tyler Lockett on like legacy contracts in a way. And Odell Beckham Jr., most people probably pick Dionte Johnson over Odell Beckham Jr. week in, week out. If you were building a fantasy team, well, maybe not fantasy football, but if you're building a team in like Madden or whatever that is, so that probably makes sense. But I want to look at what those stats show. Like, what's the value for the dollar that is spent on Dionte Johnson? Because that's an area where I think for Steeler fans and as from the GM perspective, the return on investment can be challenging. Now, a lot of people, you might watch this going, hang on, he's had Matt Canada there for 3 years. Hang on, he had Big Ben out for a year. That's a big deal. Hang on, the Steelers' offense has been struggling for a long time, particularly while they were trying to find that running back. All those things aside, there are wide receivers at his position that are dealing with challenges just the same, and they do better all the same. So let's look at Dionte. Now, one thing that he has fixed this year is the amount of drops that he's had. So in terms of the drops, he's only had 1 on the season so far. Obviously, remember 2020 he had 13. 2022 he had 7. So going into this year was coming off 2 years where it had 12, averaging 6 per year. He's only had 1 so far. But obviously he's only played in 7 games of their 11 so far as well. So you've got to put that into context. You also got to put that into context with his production rate. But the quarterback rating that he's allowing on the season is 75. Not as bad as last year. This is largely affected by the touchdowns last year and the switch between Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. But he's definitely behind in terms of the asset he provides the quarterback when they're throwing to him. The other thing about Dionte Johnson, if we look at him to date as well, despite like all this adversity, he's had 71 games with 21 TDs. Now, put that in perspective. Another guy this week, another Steeler legend in Hines Ward, He had 85 TDs in 217 games. Even if Dionte Johnson played 3 times as many games for the Steelers, he would be much behind those 85 TDs. That's what the numbers say right now. San Antonio Holmes in 112 games, not just for the Steelers, obviously, had 36 TDs. Again, Dionte Johnson, to get to 36 TDs, would actually be playing another 20 to 30 games, potentially more than what San Antonio Holmes, Santonio, sorry. I was San Antonio. Santonio Holmes needed in terms of to get his touchdown. So Dionte Johnson is behind the 8 ball there. That is what it is. And this is exactly why he's not on more than 20 million a year. 100% why. So there's some things to keep in mind. The other thing I would say as well, in terms of the catch percentage, that just seems to go backward. 54.5%. Saw it, knocked out of the ball or play before the fumble. That just seems to me there's a regression there. Basically, since 2019, which again, you use the excuse of Big Ben being out, but he had one of his best years. He actually had one of his best years for the Steelers, 5 TDs in the games he played. He looked good. He was a key weapon. I think the stats, 70% of what they would have been if he'd been there with Big Ben. That would have been another 1,000-yard year for him. I truly believe that if Big Ben wasn't injured in 2019. So John, as I say, fairness to Dionte, there's some statistical output that's not quite there, and that's circumstantial. But you've got to kind of overcome it, right? You've really got to kind of overcome it when you think about the fact that there are other wide receivers out there that are getting by with it. And so I thought we'd look at terms of contract and guys. I didn't want to go above and compare him to is he value compared to guys that are more expensive. But I want to look at these 5 guys, and I'll tell you why. Stephon Diggs, obviously, Buffalo had to fire their OC. Buffalo are a highly touted team with a good quarterback, should be doing better than what they have. Mike Evans, great wide receiver, legacy wide receiver, legend really at the position, played, almost, I think it's 11 seasons in the league. Playing with all sorts of things going on at quarterback since Tom Brady left. Played with all sorts of things with Jameis Winston before Tom Brady got there. So he's an interesting one to put in there. Then you got Hunter Renfrow. All the crap that's going on at the Raiders that this season, all the different changes and all the rest of it, he's in there. And again, he's within 2 or 3 million in terms of average pay per year of Dionte Johnson, so it makes sense there as well. Then you got Christian Kirk. As I said, he's only about $500,000 difference. He's on he's got a longer term contract, but he's got a guy in Trevor Lawrence who's up and coming, who's finding his feet. I mean, I think he's found his feet, but he was finding his feet previously for the Jags, so that's still happening. And then you got Curtis Samuel, out at the Washington Commanders, who obviously has Sam Howell there, has had Carson Wentz, who's had all sorts of quarterbacks there, so he's had challenges too. Now, I didn't want to go through this video, it'd be miles long if we compare every year, all the years of their career and what they've done to date, and have to do all the, the clarification and justification, because there's guys here that have played, 5 years, there's guys who have played over 10 seasons, as I said. But Dionte Johnson, and there's stats here that don't rely on you having played all the amount of games and all the amount of snaps this season. He don't lead in anything, right? And that, I don't know. I take issue with that, really, because it matches the attitude of what we see on the field. I mean, I'm surprised they got a photo of him smiling here. All right, maybe that's a little bit unfair. But I go through this, and I find some things fairly perplexing, right? Now, we will say, if you look at the yardage here, and you look at the TDs, and you look at the targets, obviously, he has only played in 7 games this year versus everyone else. He's played 11 or 12, depending on when they've had their buys, and maybe the odd small injury. Go down to yardage. Dionte Johnson is 5th on the list, so he's ahead of Hunter Renfrow. That's a good thing. But he's the number 1 wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we've seen him drop balls. We've seen him be off on plays. We've seen him miss TDs. He should have a minimum 3 to 5 TDs, even in these games. If you look at those drops, let's call it 3. Let's be fair. He should have well over 500 yards easily. Now, we can bring up the Matt Canada reference, but this is what it is. But you look at that catch percentage at 54.5%, behind Samuel, behind Mike Evans, behind Kirk, behind Diggs, behind even Renfro. Renfro does do a lot of design plays. But every play you could argue is designed for to get the ball to wide receiver. That's what it is. It's 54.5%. Remember, he's paid more than these guys too. Yards per target, 7. Equal bottom with Curtis Samuel. First downs, 20. Now that's equal, he and Curtis Samuel are tied there. It's not last with Hunter Renfro, but Hunter Renfro has only been targeted 29 times versus 55 times for Dionte Johnson. And I mean, this is the thing, like Curtis Samuel, because I can go pull up his contract number, and Curtis Samuel ain't getting paid what Dionte Johnson's getting paid. Curtis Samuel getting paid $11.5 million a year on average, right? $7 million a year difference. That's $20 million over life the contract difference. Huge, right? $7 million gets the Steelers an okay cornerback to help them out. $7 million would have got them a strong safety. So like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, that guy, the strong safety that ended up, I think it was went from the Lions there, that the Eagles lost, like that gets you that guy. There's a lot of positions that helps you with. It gets you a decent O-lineman on top of the money they already spent. So like maybe replaces your tackle. Like that goes out and gets you another receiving tight end. There's a lot you can do with $7 million. So that's why we'll just go there in terms of that. But yeah, as I say, going back to that 20 first downs, it's very hard when you look at Dionte Johnson to sit there and say he provides value. The only value of obviously he provides a baseline value. He's another body for Kenny Pickett. Obviously he provides value in he takes pressure off Pickens. But you got Allen Robinson there. You got Calvin Austin there. You got Pat Freeman, who showed in this game. You can come back, second full game, without the idiot Matt Canada behind the thing. Maybe I'm being unfair. But without Matt Canada there, and hey, you can throw down the middle. Hey, you can catch 9 for 11. Hey, he can catch 120 yards for Kenny Pickett. You got two dual running backs here for at least another season. Like, you can probably afford to move on from Dionte. You probably can. Because why would you pay a guy this much money per year to produce this result? And that's what I think the Steelers and their front office are in the situation with. Now, they're not going to cut the guy. I'm telling you that. They'd rather put up with a pouting Dionte Johnson than cut the guy. Like that's something that's not happening, right? That's not happening. But you could trade him. And you could get draft picks in the middle of the rounds. You could find depth lineman there. You could go out and get another second or third round gun wide receiver. That's something that's very realistic as well. And so that's why I thought it might be interesting to pull up who right now, based on current pay per year, is available as a free agent this year. Mike Evans, he's on a void year being paid by the Buccaneers. Beckham Jr. Now they're 31-32. They don't really provide citizens. Curtis Samuel's there. We go get Curtis Samuel. We could save $7 million. I mean, depends if these guys, obviously get re-signed by their own team. Then there's a massive drop-off. The reason why I bring that up too, even Calvin Ridley's out there. I'm like, man, go get Calvin Ridley, right? Go get him from the Jags. That would be awesome. But I think they'll do everything they can to re-sign him. Now, this, you sit there and go, well, who's going to replace him? They have to go younger. Do we want that? I mean, I'd go out there and I'd rather go get Pittman or Higgins if they're not re-signed by the Bengals and the Colts. And I don't know whether they will. I think Pittman more likely than Higgins. The Bengals have got to pay a lot of guys. Go get T Higgins in this offense. I think that could be really, really big. I've always been a fan of T Higgins. Go get a guy like Laviska Shenault, right? But these guys aren't going to probably, well, Higgins might cost you $18 million. Colts now, the Pittman now with the salary cap where he's made cost $18 million. But what I wanted to say was the thing is that there's a lot of guys in that 29 and older bracket. Dionte Johnson will be getting close to 28, if not 28, when the offseason rolls around. But then there's a lot of other guys that are in that 25, 27 that get really expensive. So if the Steelers are busy paying $5 million still of Dionte Johnson's contract, and he's only going to have a cap hit of $10 million for the year, for a team, that's pretty cheap if Dionte Johnson is going to be a number 2, or it's a bad team that doesn't want to spend and needs to spend in other building blocks of a position, and then can evaluate Dionte Johnson for a year and then choose what they want to do with him. Dionte Johnson offers a lot of opportunity for a team that wants to try something new without having to overspend at the wide receiver position. But he also offers a lot to the Steelers in getting some level of return on investment for a wide receiver that just doesn't look like he wants to be there some of the time. And that's the reality of it. So look, as I said, I wasn't going to deeply comment on the fumble. I do think Dionte's had drops. I do think Dionte's had lapses in judgment. I do think Dionte misses catches that a top wide receiver should make. I do think a wide receiver should go chase after a ball that a fumble, no matter whose fault it is or whose fault it's not. I think he should do that regardless of whether he gets targeted every game. I think he should do that regardless of who the coordinator or the quarterback is. That's why I want to give you this perspective that there are Dionte Johnson. It's not you can't get no return on investment. I just don't think you're going to get the return on investment on the field. I think you're going to get the return on investment off the field and bringing new guys that might have an ROI on the field. But anyway, would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, what you thought of all of this. As always, if you'd like the show, hit that like button. It helps me know which content you're liking, what types of content you're liking. And also, if you're not a sub yet and you're interested in our content, please hit that sub button. It does really help us. We're on a goal, 500 plus before the end of the season. Working hard to get there. And as always, go Steelers.